Hello, we're going to be in Hebrews 2, 10 through 18. And as we begin this text, we're going to see that he starts off with the word for again. And this word is going to allude back to the content of the previous text. And at the end of chapter 2, verses 5 through 9, there was the statement that Jesus, kind of as the culmination of humanity, the perfect human, he was crowned with glory and honor because of his suffering and death. And so that idea of suffering is going to be key to our text today. And it's going to talk about how through suffering, Jesus is going to serve as a priest. And this is going to set up the theology of later in this book that starts at the end of chapter 4 and runs all the way through chapter 10. But let's follow the flow of thought here. For it was fitting that he, and we could read where it says he there, as God the Father. So it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, you could almost think of that kind of existing almost in a parentheses, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation. So Jesus is the founder, the source, the pioneer might be another word that we could use there, perfect through suffering. So God made Christ perfect through suffering. Now that word perfect, we'd probably balk at that a little bit and think, oh no, is this saying that Jesus was made perfect? He wasn't actually perfect in his nature. It's not trying to say that. This is language that's used of the priests in their priestly ministry as they're consecrated for ministry. So just think he's consecrating Christ for this priestly ministry that he's going to set up and discuss through the rest of the book. Jesus is without sin. And that is beyond dispute within the book itself. So for he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified, so this word sanctify and sanctified, maybe we'll even use a different color, use red there, right? The one who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. This word is technically actually not even in the Greek text. It's just pointing back to this idea. This word up here kind of means source or pioneer and founder. And what it's trying to say is he who sanctifies, right, the one who makes holy, and those who are made holy all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers. So that is why Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers. Jesus is the source. And he's going to ground this idea in Jesus being made perfect through suffering, and then his bringing of sanctification to those through that suffering. He's going to ground it in a couple of Old Testament texts. One of them is Psalm 22. Actually, it's verse 22 that he's going to ground that in. And then he's also going to ground it in Isaiah 8, 17 through 18. So Psalm 22 right here, and then Isaiah 8 is kind of these two texts here. And what he's saying is Jesus is the one who suffered. He was appointed to his priestly task through suffering, and through that he's going to make his brothers sanctified or holy as he does that. And he's going to quote these two texts to prove that. I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. So going through this quickly, just know that Psalm 22 and Isaiah 8 are both messianic texts that are talking about the ministry of the Messiah, the ministry of Christ. And Psalm 22 is what Jesus quotes on the cross, where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? If you read through that psalm, you'll see that there are messianic aspects to it. And Isaiah 8 is right in the middle of that text in Isaiah, where he starts off by talking about the virgin who's going to conceive and bear a child, Isaiah 7:14. And then in chapter 8, he's talking about God's movement in the world through this child and another one that's going to come. In chapter 9, the government is going to be on his shoulders. He's going to be a son of David. Isaiah 11 is going to be this one who has the Spirit of the Lord, who's going to usher in a new heavens and new earth. So both of these are just kind of in the middle of these messianic sections and messianic texts. So he's going to move on from there and say, since that is true, therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. So we, those people who come to faith, right, who according to verse 9 Jesus has tasted death for, he's tasted death for us. Since the children share in flesh and blood, since we're humans, right, we're humans, he himself likewise partook of the same things, right, flesh and blood, humanity. Jesus took on flesh. Jesus became incarnate is the idea that the author of Hebrews is working on here. And he did that so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. So God has given authority and to the devil. You see this in 2 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 15. Jesus is defeating death and defeating the devil. Ephesians 6 talks about these ideas as well. And deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. So he came to do a couple of things. He took on human nature. He took on flesh. Jesus Christ is one person with two natures, fully human and fully divine, so that he might, one, destroy, right, the one who has the power of death, so that he might destroy the devil, and so that he might deliver all who through fear of death are subject to lifelong slavery. So he's delivering all of those who are enslaved to sin and death and the devil. You can read about this in Romans 6 and 7. For surely it was not to angels, so he's going back then to the argument from chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2, that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. He's helping human beings. He's helping us. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect. He had to become human, right? He had to become like his brothers in every respect, so that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest. He's going to talk about this high priest content through the largest section of the book, the end of chapter 4, all the way through chapter 10. So we'll talk about that in more detail when we get there. And he's going to make some notes about Moses and rest in the meantime, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God. This word service is just used of the priests. They serve, they work, they keep the temple. And he's doing this to make propitiation. In fact, I'm going to use the red there for the sins of the people. I would love to have more time to discuss this, but in keeping this brief, propitiation is the appeasement of God's wrath, the satisfaction of God's divine justice and judgment. So he makes propitiation for the sins of his people. You see this same language in 1 John chapter 2. For because he himself has suffered, because Jesus has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Because Jesus became incarnate, because he took on flesh, he is able to help those who are being tempted. And that is us. And that is a glorious, wonderful, beautiful thought. I hope that you're helped by that today.